And the fact that he actually had some decent high notes in his back pocket, but they didn't last very long at all when he went to play in his band. And he really wanted to know how the 16-week upper register course could help out with that if it mainly focused on higher notes. And that's when I told him, I said, well, endurance is a byproduct of your range. Okay? So if you want better endurance, you just simply have to increase your range. That's what you got to do. It also goes hand in hand with being able to have more duration on your chop. So let's just give you a quick weird example. Let's just say that you are a trumpet player and you've done very well for yourself and you can just honk out really, really loudly and beautifully a double G, which is the top note in upper register before we go into extreme. Okay? But let's just say that you only practice 10 minutes a day or 15 minutes a day. Okay? Now, typically what I would tell people is take your max range in your practice at home and come down about 4 or 5 notes. And that's going to be the range where you actually have the best endurance in a rehearsal or a performance or a solo. So if he had that double G and he came down to high C, for example, that would be the perfect playing range for him. Now, and also for endurance. Now, based on what I just said, well, you might think, well, then he's going to have tons and tons of endurance. No. Remember I just said this guy is practicing 10 or 15 minutes a day tops. Maybe he's a busy professional, or maybe he's an MD and just doesn't have time to practice. But he does 10 or 15 minutes a day to maintain his double G. A little warm-up, he goes up, hits the G and a couple other things, and then he's done. This individual is not going to fare too well, even if he takes my advice with that correlation of 4 or 5 notes below your highest notes at home or in your practice studio. Simply because he doesn't have enough time, doesn't have enough of metal on his mouth outside rehearsals and performances. So even though he has the desired ratio of 4 or 5 notes below, that's the music he's playing, goes up to about a high C, maybe a high D, that would be perfect for this individual, except for the fact he doesn't really practice that much. So you have to have both parts of the equation. Now, here's where most people have a problem. Most people get the second part of the equation. Okay? So most people are practicing, if they got an hour and a half rehearsal that they know they're got to go to, on average, these people are practicing an hour to an hour and a half a day, sometimes 2 hours a day, thinking that by practicing that much every day, they will actually be able to go through an entire rehearsal or a performance. No, because they didn't get the other part of the equation. The other part of the equation is the range. So let's just give an example of someone playing at a community big band. Maybe at your community college, maybe you meet at a church, or maybe it meets after school at a junior high or high school. And you happen to be the lead trumpet player, and you got a really solid high D, really solid high D at home, and you go up to E flat, it's still decent, not as solid, and E kind of thin out. So you're right around the D, E flat range. And you are practicing 2 hours a day. You're trying to do everything right. But you notice that when you get into your big band rehearsal on Monday night or Tuesday night or Thursday night or whatever it is, that halfway through the rehearsal, your chops are falling apart. You're missing these high Ds and the high Cs, and you're getting the burn here. Just feels like you can't hold the note and your lips are blowing out and you're going out of tune. It's just not fun. I mean, you're smashing your lips pretty good with the mouthpiece. And you keep scratching your head, what's going on? Because I'm practicing an hour and a half or 2 hours a day, but I'm not able to have the endurance in my rehearsal. I'm cursed. There's some kind of hex that's put on me. No, my friend. When you go into a big, typical amateur to semi-pro big band rehearsal, most of the high range is going to be up around high C and high D. Yeah, you might find one chart that goes E or F, but basically, you're going to be required to play quite a lot of high Cs and Ds. And if your range at home is a high D or a high E flat, and let me just excuse myself for a second for other brass players, trombone players, euphonium, French horn, tuba, whatever, you just have to transpose whatever that is. This story that I'm telling is geared toward trumpet, but really it's geared to everybody, but you would have to transpose the notes and make it your own story. So the problem with this particular individual, he is doing everything right practice-wise. Probably is a really great player. His endurance is being inefficient in rehearsals and performances simply because he doesn't have the other part of the equation down. He needs to be having at least double F sharps and double Gs pretty full and pretty decent at home. At least be able to hit a couple of them at home. Doesn't mean he has to play all day on those, but he has to be able to go up and reach those and tackle them pretty good a couple times in order to balance out this part of the equation. That's what most people are not getting. And in fact, it's not that they're not getting it. I think most people just don't know. Every time I talk to somebody about this, they don't really sync up the fact that your range has everything to do with your endurance. It really does. So I don't care if you practice 4 hours a day. If your range is D or E, you're just not going to be able to play D or E for 3 or 4 hours in a wedding reception big band. You know what I'm talking about? Your big band gets hired to do someone's wedding reception, and they're going to have you play from 9 p.m. until 1 a.m. at night with, you got 4 sets, 45 minutes. You're not going to last. If your range is high D and high E, and you're playing Ds and Es in that particular wedding reception gig, you just are going to fall apart, and you're probably going to have to hit up somebody else in the section to cover some of your lead stuff. It's just not going to balance out that well. Same thing if you're in a brass quintet. That's really, really tough on your endurance and on your chops. And if you're playing some of the easier brass quintet stuff where you just typically need to go up to Fs and Gs above the staff, which is really common in some of the easier stuff, or maybe even just high A right above the staff, and you have a high C, high D range, you're probably going to do okay on that, especially if you've been practicing the right amount. But if you're playing some of the tougher stuff, Empire brass, Canadian brass, that type of stuff, and which we're talking about stuff that goes, routinely high C's, D's, E's, and F's, especially if you have to have your pick out. But even if you don't, you're still going to be required to lots of high C's and D's. You're going to have all kinds of trouble in that particular group, simply because you don't have the range that's way above that. So this is a pretty important tutorial, at the very least, for you to have the light bulb turned on your head so you can go, wait a minute, I've been practicing 3 hours a day, but when I go into my band, I can't even play half of that. Well, it's because of the range thing. And so that's why I get some people saying they're not interested in playing high notes, and they want to play music. Well, here's the problem. If you don't develop your high range, I don't care what instrument, I don't care if you just play tuba. If you don't have any range, low and high range on your tuba, you're just going nowhere musically. And the same thing on the other brasses, French horn, euphonium, cornet, trumpet, trombone, even slide bow. It doesn't really matter. If your range is not well above of what you have to play in your ensemble, you're just going to be out to lunch. You're going to be struggling. So when I hear people say, I don't want to play high notes, I don't want to be that guy, that obnoxious screamer dude. Well, this is not about that. You can do what you want. Once you are able to play high, you can do what you want with it. Okay? If you have a great range, that means you don't have to scream out high notes and hang over and be that obnoxious high note player. What you can do is you can play comfortable and easy in your ensembles and have plenty of endurance, and that will make you feel just a million times better about playing, because this is going to be pretty much rock solid. So let's go back to the original topic in question, is endurance. What is endurance? How can you improve your endurance? What are some things you can do to improve your endurance? Well, we already talked about the foundation of endurance. I didn't really describe what endurance is, so let's really talk about endurance. Endurance is the ability to do a particular activity over and over for a period of time, usually a long period of time, and still be able to function quite well. So that's the definition of endurance. So let's just take, I was on a site reading about marathoners, and obviously, this is a no-brainer, right? If you can run 26.2 miles, you got some hefty endurance, right? Your heart, your muscles, your legs, your energy, everything. Well, when I got into how some of these marathoners train, and these aren't just the professionals, just people in general who want to be able to run a marathon and have that endurance, do you think that they run 26 miles every day? And that's how they practice and train for a marathon? No, they don't. They might get in 20 or 26 miles once a week, maybe once every 10 days, but they're getting close to it on the other days. They might be doing some 10, 15, and 20 mile runs. But what else are they doing? They're doing very, very, very fast sprints over a mile. They're doing very, very fast runs for 5K and 6K and 10K. 5K and 10K runs. They're they're doing those very, very fast. And then they're still trying to up their speed on their 15-mile or 20-mile runs. Why are they doing all that? Because they know that if they can have a faster running pace at these reduced miles or reduced distances, that's just going to help them that much more when they go for the marathon. And so let's think about that in terms of playing a brass instrument. The shorter durations, like the mile sprint that a marathoner might do, might be for, well, I'm speaking trumpet, but it could be for any brass instrument, might be that double G or that high F that you're hitting a couple times after you warm up and playing it really, really loud. That's like your mile sprint if you're a marathoner. And if you're doing that, good, you got the sprint. And then the other things would be, like let's just say your 10K run, your 6 mile, you're going to really push the speed on that if you're a marathoner, right? Well, if you're playing a brass instrument, you're going to be doing some etudes and some other phrases that are going to be up around that high C, D, E flat range, okay? And you're going to be blowing those out pretty loudly, maybe even E or F. And so that's kind of how it translates into endurance on a brass instrument. The bottom line is you can't just practice for 3 hours a day. That's like a marathoner trying to do a 26-mile run every day and thinking that they're going to be able to run a 26-mile marathon. Fact is, even if they can do it at home under the stress and the pressure of a competition and a race, and what if they're not filling up to snuff and all they've ever done is run that 26 miles, they're going to have the same problem that any brass player would have in an ensemble or rehearsal and find themselves hitting a wall and gassing out maybe halfway through or maybe 3/4 of the way. And so that strategy that I read about for marathoners is what I already know for this guy, for a brass instrument. Can't just practice 3 hours a day and expect to go in and play on your teeth at the range that your top range that you can play. You play a double G and you go play Buddy Rich for a rehearsal and Rob McConnell, Frank Mantooth, Big Fat Band, Maynard Ferguson, Louis Bellson. I mean, come on. You go play F's and double G's and you're not going to last, and you might end up hurting yourself, or you're going to feel the hurt up here because you're going to be playing on the skin of your teeth. So endurance is the ability to do an activity over a period of time and do it successfully. And the way we build endurance on any brass instrument is to increase our range 4 to 5 notes above what you have to play in your rehearsal and your performances. And then, of course, you also have the longevity of your practice to be pretty close to, what you're expected to do in a rehearsal or performance. So let's talk about that real quick. If you're going to a Monday night big band rehearsal, for example, I'm saying that because now it's Monday night, and there actually happens to be a rehearsal big band next door to me. I'm over here at the college. So if their rehearsal goes from 7 to 9, which I think they said it does, 7 to 9, maybe 7 to 9:30, well, you need to be practicing, I would say, at least close to that on a daily basis. An hour and a half to 2 hours a day would be perfect. Probably can get away with an hour and a half if you have a higher range, but somewhere around an hour and a half to 2 hours would be good. Now, if you don't do that, what you're going to do is you're going to come in, you're going to be like the weekend warrior. You're going to come in and you're going to go to the rehearsal and you're going to struggle and your chops are going to fall apart at the end, and you're always going to hate playing the last couple of songs because you can't make it. And so if you don't mind that, well, that's a personal choice for you. But if you want to come in, sail through the rehearsal, and at the end of the rehearsal, feel like you want to keep playing because you feel good and you're really in the groove, then you actually have to, 1, increase your range 5 steps above your playing range in that particular ensemble. 2, make sure that the longevity and the duration of your practice is pretty close to what you're expected to do when you go into the rehearsal or performance. And how do we increase, what are some ways to increase your range and endurance? Well, I already made another video about that on YouTube. It's called the 3 most popular ways to increase your range. And those three popular ways would be a good way for you to start if you don't have any other resources. That would be flexibility studies, lip trills, lip slurs, glissandos, any type of long tone endeavor or routine. Long tones, anything from Maggio stuff, Stamp stuff, Gordon, and then also taking stuff up an octave. The reason you got to do that is because you have to get your embouchure used to actually playing on you. I mean, you cannot not practice higher at home and expect to be able to go out there and do that in function in a rehearsal or performance. I mean, you actually have to, play higher. And what I recommend for a lot of my students is to get something that they can actually play that's written high. And the reason for that is there's a psychological component. So if you're just always used to taking stuff up an octave in stuff that you might read, whether it could be the Arben's book or maybe a jazz lick or whatever, there's a psychological component that can intimidate you. And if you're not used to reading and seeing all the ledger lines about the staff, even though you can play those notes and you've been practicing, there's a psychological component that destroys a lot of people when they go into a reading band or just a band in general and they got to play these notes. And you get intimidated by looking at all those ledger lines. Those notes look higher than they really are. That just scares you. You see 3 dashes and then the note sitting on that third dash with the staff, that's an E, high E for trumpet. That might scare a lot of people, seeing that. And when you can already do that at home, but you've been taken up an octave. So my suggestion for increasing your endurance would be to make sure that let's just recap this lesson right now, just to make sure that your daily practice is pretty close. Doesn't have to always be exact, but it is coming in pretty close to what you're expected to do in your rehearsal. If you have a 2-hour rehearsal, for example, at least get in, an hour and a half a day of practice. That's the number one thing that you got to make sure that you're doing. And the number 2, the other part of the equation, these are both equal, is you have to do things to increase your range 4 or 5 notes above what you're seeing in your rehearsal. And I just told you what to do. What were they? Lip flexibility, lip trill, glissandos, lip slurs, long tones, including pedal tones, and then playing stuff high or up an octave. And then the part B of that is to actually get some stuff written above the staff, so you're not intimidated psychologically and when you see those notes way above the staff. So I hope this really helped. I mean, this is some very, very good advice for you. It really is. If you just start doing this, you are going to be tickled that you notice you can play higher and better and you last longer in your rehearsals. And it doesn't have to be just about jazz. This could be orchestral, symphonic, like I already mentioned, brass quintet, chamber. It really is all about the duration of your particular ensemble and not so much about the idiom or the style. Same thing, if you got the metal on your mouth for 2 hours in a symphony rehearsal, it might be a little bit easier because we know brass players a lot of times, we have to count like 100 measures of rest, so there is a little bit of an easier component there when you're playing orchestral stuff compared to other stuff. But you get the gist of this in lesson on endurance. Remember, there's 2 parts of it, and you can't just have one without the other. If you do, it's going to be like this. Crash and burn, baby. You don't want that. Kurt Thompson, hope you really enjoyed this. Found it informative, and don't just watch it and go on to something else. Make notes and actually start doing it.